things done and love so people along the way, even when, as Phil said, he could be very direct. I think part of the reason why Dad was Dad is because he remained perpetually overwhelmed at the goodness of God in his own life. He stayed amazed at the goodness of God because he knew that in his life, Jesus had changed everything. So we know that Dad was full of advice. In his last days, he said to one of his grandchildren, "Walk straight and know who you're following. You want to know how to live? Ask Jesus. You want to know how to die? Ask Jesus. He'll never fail you, even if you think he has." But he was also quite practical. He also said to another grandson, Evan, "Study, read, learn all you can, eat right, and stay regular." It really was the profound and the practical. When he preached my ordination service, Carol and Ted, you were there 30 years ago, he picked an obscure passage that I could not understand why he would pick that scripture verse. And I've used it for today. And you might think, why that one? He preached out of John chapter 1, verse 14. "And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And we beheld his glory. The glory is of the only begotten from the Father, full of grace and truth." Now, that's a Christmas verse to me. What does that have to do with an ordination? What does that have to do with a funeral? Well, and my dad explained it. When Jesus showed up in the world, it changed everything, right? And when Jesus shows up in the life of a person, it changes everything. Not only for the person, but for all the people around. So when Jesus showed up, the Message translation says that when God put skin on and moved into the neighborhood, it changes things. And it changed the life of a 9-year-old boy from a very, very broken home. So when grace enters the world, when grace enters your life, your family's life, it indeed does change everything. So I talked about the profound and the practical. My niece Jillian talked about this very no-nonsense man who married a very beautiful woman. And so you may be wondering, what are these two chairs doing here? When we moved to Fresno 40 years ago, this will qualify to get into the Smithsonian soon. We didn't have a lot of money. My mom had her eye on some dining chairs. And my dad said, "Now, Ruth Ann, why would we spend money on just a few dining chairs? We can buy 20 of these." And stack them. That's the thing. See, these don't stack. We can buy 20 of these, and we can use them. Lori, remember we had youth Sunday school in our house for years, and we used these chairs, didn't we? Mom stewed over that for 10 years. She finally got her dining chair. So that's Mom, that's Dad. Talking to Cousin Randy, Jesus took care of details and he took care of people. In 1979, my mom and dad were living in Barbados, and a hurricane that was headed for Barbados at the last minute turned course, and it went to another island instead, and it devastated this island of Dominica. It was said at the time there was not a leaf left on the island. 80,000 people in that little island, in that country, no power, no food, no running water. 80% of the agriculture had been destroyed. It was a humanitarian crisis. And the missionaries who were on the island, they rode out the hurricane. And Fred and Betty decided they were not going to evacuate. They were going to stay and they were going to rebuild. But who was going to help them? Jerry Rick. She writes, "We had no resources and little communication, but we knew we were called to stay. How were we going to do this? Jerry went to work. Jerry came through. His ingenuity and his hustle found a way, chartering multiple boats from Barbados to cross the 196 miles of the Caribbean Sea, setting up a pipeline of ongoing delivery of food and building supplies. It resulted in the salvation practically of an entire village, where we planted a church and we built 80 houses. And for years, people would come to the Lord because they had been touched by the kindness of what we were able to do. She goes on, Betty Walker, he was relentless, keeping the supplies and the encouragement coming. When a critical article was printed about our response to the humanitarian crisis on this island, saying that we were ineffective and didn't do anything, Jerry responded with a 3-page single-spaced letter to the editor, sharing his perspective and setting the record straight, shining a light on the good work that was being accomplished.
Amen.
But he gave all the credit to others and none to himself. He was a selfless servant to his missionary colleagues. It was always about lifting other people up so they could get the recognition. 5 months after being on the island, we finally were able to go to Barbados for a rest. Jerry met us at the airport, surprised us. He put us up at the Hilton for a week. I don't know how he ever paid for that, but what for it. A government official later told us that Baptists help save a country. Jerry loved that, because Baptists were the first to respond after the U.S. government, and they even got there before the British government. But the major part of the credit belonged to Dad for his vision and his work to address the needs. Charlie Floyd is here today. He talks about the David and Jonathan friendship that he and Dad had. 74 projects you all did together, 2,000 consultations in 10 states, working with Korean, Chinese, Vietnamese, Mexican, African American, and Caucasian churches, right? Projects ranging from $10,000 to $10 million, as Phil said, including the building that we are in today. A friend from San Diego said, I was blessed to be one of the Christian workers that he mentored along the way. Martha Mullen, maybe some of you know her. He challenged me and encouraged a very young me to step out of my comfort zone to serve the Lord by training others. Kirk, you're here today. Kirk grew up as a missionary kid on the neighboring island of St. Vincent. And Kirk writes, I must honor this mighty man of God, Pastor Jerry Harris, co-laborer with my father, Don Overstreet, in the Caribbean and in California. He stood for my dad when my dad thought he would never be able to pastor again, that the divorce in my dad's life disqualified him from ministry. But Jerry couldn't imagine someone with such a passion for Jesus benched due to a divorce. So my father, a single father, had another chance because Jerry advocated for my father. And he continued till my father's last days, being one of his closest friends. They would call each other and they would cheer each other on, and I would stop by when I was in Fresno, Kirk says, to hear his good stories. Karen, you're here today. Where are you? So Karen says, your dad blessed me in 2 seasons of my life. First was 50 years ago as a small child, when my dad ran the bus ministry at Foxworthy Baptist Church in San Jose. They made sure that kids like me could get to church. So Jerry served as the assistant bus captain. Now, you know, Karen, he was in charge, but he served as the assistant so that he could lead someone from behind so they could get the experience, right, of what it meant to be a leader. They would come to my house every Saturday to make sure I wanted to come to church on Sunday. They would then come on Sunday and pick me up and take me home. They did this, Karen says, for 4 years until she moved here to Clovis. I don't know if I would know the Lord, Karen says, if it wasn't for Jerry. Karen goes on to say, 18 years later, I started attending Woodward Park Baptist Church. The bus captain, Charlie, came to visit and said, you know, that's Jerry. And Karen said, I know that's Jerry. He said, no, that's Bus Jerry. Oh, Karen didn't know that was Bus Jerry. From that moment on, Karen writes, Jerry treated me like I was extra special. I was his bus kid. I love this man so very much. He was a blessing to me as a child and then again as an adult. Todd Haddock is a part of this church. And Todd says that 14 years ago, I met Jerry. He was always giving rides to the Scribner family to church. And then he helped them get into a condo much closer to the church. And Jerry and I became friends very quickly. And he and his wife, Ruth Ann, were always helping out the Scribners while Nellie was working. Jerry would pick Noah up from school, take him home. Ruth Ann would feed him. It was mainly snickerdoodle cookies, as I understand. He had a little desk where he would do his schoolwork, and then Jerry would take him back home. Years later, Jerry would attend some of Noah's basketball games, but Jerry would never let Todd pick him up. Jerry always needed a car in case Ruth Ann needed him and he needed to get home. Todd says, 3 years ago, my dad passed away, and the first person I called was Jerry, and he guided me through the process. Jerry's whole life was helping others, Todd said. Todd does not know how prophetic he is when he says this. It wasn't about driving a fancy car. Dad had a very unique and unusual relationship with cars. If a car didn't have 200,000 miles on it, it wasn't any good. So it wasn't about driving a fancy car or going to the local pub. No, Todd. Dad would never be found in a local pub. Or pounding his chest, saying how great he was. A true man of God who, with his missionary work and his huge heart, will always be one of my heroes. So, friends, Matthew 5:16. Even so, let your light shine before men, Jesus says, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. Jerry was a light bearer. He was special. He had a special light. He was never afraid to shine it, and he did good works only so that people would see God and not him. So a mighty oak has fallen. Jerry has made it home. Dad would always say, I'm not afraid of death, but dying is the pits. He was on the finance committee until the end. He told Steve Pearson, Steve, I'm on hospice. You can let me off the committee. Steve said, no way. We need you. And I think that mattered to him. You heard what my son Jonathan said, what his friend said, that if you walked into a room and the only person you knew was Jerry, that would be enough. Dad always said, Scott, remember, God takes good notes. Be good to everyone because everyone's hurting. And one day he woke up and he thought he was dead. And he gave us a list of people to call to let him know. He always talked about heaven, even before he got sick. He said, one of my first requests when I get to heaven, I want to go in a video room, and I want to see if God will show me the video of how he created the world. We always joked. We thought in our younger years, who's going to take care of Dad when he gets old? That is not going to be easy. Kind of like rock, paper, scissors. Who gets to take care of Dad? Oh my goodness, he made it so easy. He was so good. And I don't want to exaggerate, he had his moments, but he was so grateful. So grateful to Greg for all that Greg did to care for Mom and him. So grateful to our Aunt Norma Lee, who's lived with us, who has done so much. Dad wanted to live at home. He wanted to die at home. And it was Team Jerry there for a while. We made it work, right? Between Greg and Norma Lee, and then my sister Leslie, who sort of put her life on hold for months to be there. I did what I could, but I had a job and kids, and so I watched them be heroes to my dad. And thank you. I said, Dad, did you ever think that you would become even sweeter as you grew older? He said, son, I'm determined not to die a more grumpy old man. And he worked so hard at it. Carol, you said, who knows? Maybe when you got to heaven, Mom said, Jerry, what took you so long? John chapter 1, 14. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. We have beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten from the Father, full of grace and truth. Thank you, Jerry, for being a blessing to us. Thank you, Dad.